Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Today I am truly honoured to bring to you Professor Hannah Dahlen to discuss a very important topic of induction of labour. If you have been recommended an induction, this is a powerful podcast to understand the full ramifications of that decision. In the next episode of the Transform Your Birth podcast, I'll take this topic one step further and share how I prepare women for induction. These two episodes together will help you to step into your power when making a decision to induce and how to prepare. The key message of this podcast: when making these decisions, we need to take into account the individual pregnancy and individual woman's choices when making these decisions. I've also included the NICE, or the NICE Inductions of Labour Guidelines recommended by Hannah in the show notes, so feel free to have a look at those as well. Now, let me impress you with Hannah's credentials. Hannah Dahlen is the Professor of Midwifery and Associate Dean in the School of Nursing and Midwifery, Western Sydney University. She's been a midwife for more than 34 years. She is one of the first midwives in Australia to gain eligibility and access to a Medicare provider number and prescribing rights following government reforms in 2010. Hannah worked for nearly 10 years as a privately practising midwife alongside her role as the Professor of Midwifery. Hannah has published over 300 papers and book chapters and has strong national and international research partnerships. In 2019, Hannah was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia General Division in the Queen's Birthday Honours list for her significant services to midwifery, nursing and medical education and research. In November 2012, Hannah was named in the Sydney Morning Herald's list of 100 people who change our city for the better and named as one of the leading science and knowledge thinkers for 2012. So sit back and enjoy listening to Hannah's wisdom.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Transform Your Birth podcast. And with me today is lovely Hannah Dahlen. And I'm so excited to bring her to you today because she really has a huge background in research in this area and the evidence. And we're often presented with evidence, but it's not always accurate, it's not always up to date, and it's not always helpful when making decisions. So I'm really keen to get Hannah to talk about some of the evidence around the intervention rates. We've now got somewhere around 50% of first-time mothers are being induced. And that isn't leading to better outcomes for mothers and babies. In fact, it's leading to some not unforeseen circumstances, but it makes a lot harder as the mother makes the transition into becoming a parent. And we've also got in Canberra here a 42% caesarean rate. So a lot of these intervention rates are very concerning, particularly when they don't lead to better outcomes. So thank you, Hannah, for coming on and talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
So can you talk a little bit about induction, Hannah? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that the pressure is on for women to look at things like induction for advanced maternal age, high BMI, gestational diabetes, IVF conception. And there's a lot of women that fall into those categories, and the pressure seems to start very early on in pregnancy. What can you tell us about the evidence around induction?
So first of all, I think it's really important people understand what induction actually is, and there is sometimes confusion over that. And induction is when a labor is started by artificial means. It isn't when you have syntocin and put up to speed it up. It's actually when you commence a labor through artificial means. And those can be either a medical induction through the use of hormones that are put around the cervix, for example, or in a drip, or there can be through a mechanical induction or a combination. And a mechanical induction will often involve breaking the waters and stimulating labor through that process. But often both hormones and mechanical induction are used. So it is making your baby come at a time when your baby did not plan to come. And what's really important to know is that the baby is really fundamental in telling the mother's body and interacting with the mother's body about when it's ready to be born and when is a good time for it to be born. And we know that babies do develop at slightly different rates. And we know that for some babies, being in 42 weeks is very normal for them. And for some babies, being in 37 weeks is very normal for them. But we don't have full understanding as to what does it mean when we bring babies into this world when they're not prepared to come. So induction itself can be life-saving. It's really important not to demonize it. It can be life-saving when it's used correctly, when it's used because there are medical risks to the baby or medical risks to the mother. But it seems highly unlikely that in our current situation of nearly half of first-time mothers having an induction, and it sits at around 41%, if you look at our latest data, 41, 42%. And in some states it's higher, and in private models of care, where private obstetric models of care, it is much higher, and you see very, very different rates. But there has been a substantial rise in induction. So for example, back in 2011, it was 26% of women were being induced. That's increased to 34% of all women. But if you actually look at first-time mothers, that's where we're seeing the large numbers of first-time mothers having their labours induced. So it's a big change, and this is not just happening in Australia. This seems to be happening worldwide, and it is probably as a result of two things going on. One is the emerging evidence from some of the big randomized controlled trials that has made everybody respond in the direction of, well, induction's not really a problem and could be good. The other is probably partly to do with things like the Safer Baby Bundle, which has been the concerted effort to reduce stillbirth. And so there's increased awareness and increased focus on if the baby's movement changes or is worrying, that health providers are more likely to react and recommend induction. So there's probably a couple of things driving it. If we look at the international evidence, there's been a series of big randomized controlled trials, and that's obviously when women are randomly allocated to having their women are allocated to having their labor induced or to have it spontaneous onset of labor. And usually, if you look at the trials, the ones that everybody focuses on are the ones that sit around 41 weeks. So letting women go beyond that, or inducing women to have babies at that time. And there's been big studies done in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in the UK, in the United States of America. And interestingly, generally, those studies tell us that there isn't a huge amount of difference, but some of the studies have shown that there is a reduction in negative outcomes for the baby. Now, what's really important for women to understand is that when you look at data like this, you're looking at a huge number of people with great variations in their risk factors, in the way they're monitored, and it's all put together, and you're given an outcome. It's not individualized for individual women. And so if you actually look at women who are really low risk who are well monitored and supervised and supported, then actually the risks are minimally different for the baby. The other big complicating factor that's come into this has been a trial that occurred in the United States called the ARRIVE trial, where they routinely induced women at 39 weeks who were low risk, or they let them wait for labor onset. And they actually showed in this trial, interestingly, that inducing them led to a low cesarean section rate. What I always point out is in this low risk population, the cesarean section rate was 22% or 18%, depending which group you're looking at, which is a very high rate. If you look at the similar kind of samples in some of the Dutch and Swedish studies where they have much lower cesarean section rates, the cesarean section rate was 11% or 12% in each group. So I think the question should be more about how bad we are in some countries at supporting women to have normal births rather than that cesarean sections reduced. But when you look at the what we call big population-based studies, where we look back at data and we look at all the women who've had a baby, as we've done here in New South Wales, we've looked at 16 years of all women who had a baby, who had an induction for no medical reason compared to women who had an induction, to women who had a spontaneous onset of labor. We actually found the opposite. We found more harm to the baby, more intervention, more cesareans, more forceps, more vacuums, more problematic sequelae. And one of the reasons that might be happening is when we look at women who agree to be in a randomized trial, which means you've got to agree to having a 50% chance they're going to tell you to be induced or they're going to tell you to wait. Now, that is a very big decision for a woman to make. What we found in those studies is sometimes more than 80% of women refuse to be involved, understandably, because it really matters to them what decisions they make. So you end up with this sort of 20% of women in these trials that do not represent the general population. And so while it is what we call level 1 evidence, because randomizing somebody means that you've got similar women in each group, which means you should be able to compare pretty well. So it is a very good way of finding out whether a treatment has an effect. But if more than 80% of the people you ask to be part of it say no, you've got a problem. Because first of all, what you're trying to do to them isn't acceptable. And second of all, the population you've got doesn't represent everyone. So we're in this dilemma now where randomized controlled trials tell us one thing, but only involve small numbers of women who agree. Big population data sets are telling us something completely different. So no wonder women are confused because health providers are also confused.
Yeah. So for any woman that's being offered an induction, Hannah, what are the risks? Because often they get presented, well, you've got an IVF conception, so there's a higher risk of, and we like to induce at, and away it goes, without actually talking about the risks of induction. So can you just clearly help people to understand who are pregnant, having a baby, what are the risks with induction and when might it be appropriate?
Yes, it's really important that to remember this is a major medical intervention, like cesarean section is a major medical intervention, and we should not be doing any intervention without a really good reason. So that's the first thing. The risks of induction, I'll divide up into a couple of things. One is that they involve a lot more cascade of intervention. So when a woman has an induction, that pain is not, it's not a physiological pain, which means it's not a pain that the body is in a rhythmic dance, which labor is. So the pain starts smallish and it builds and the endorphins come in and it cascades and the woman sort of gets this sort of introduction to and build up. It is a really often harsh, severe, pain where the endorphins haven't kicked in to give you your natural pain relief. Often women start to find that they can't cope with it, so they're more likely to ask for an epidural. They also need to be monitored because the risk of putting hormones into your body is that your uterus can be too active and can actually stop the oxygen going to your baby, and that can cause risks for your baby's heart rate to drop and for your baby to have issues with oxygenating its body. There's also the risk that a mother's uterus could actually open up, which we call a rupture, because the hormonal surge coming in from the synthetic hormones is very different to the rhythmic dance that a woman's body engages in when she spontaneously onsets that labor. So the biggest risk is pain leading to epidural, leading to her being on the bed, leading to her needing a catheter, needing her to be monitored, finding it harder to push, having the baby's heart rate have more abnormalities, and therefore more likely to end up with either a forceps or a vacuum, which means increased risk of her perineum having an impact, such as an episiotomy or a big tear because of those instruments, or a cesarean section. So it's the cascade that happens because right back here at the beginning, we've done something to an incredibly ancient, finely tuned, still largely misunderstood, amazing process. And to do anything like that, you've got to have a jolly good reason. But unfortunately, I think in health, we've developed the attitude that until that baby's out, none of us can relax. We've developed the attitude that all of our technology and science is superior in far too many situations, not in the situations that are required. So those are the kind of risk factors. But what our research is showing, and we're looking at that data right now, is there's a huge amount of trauma for women following this. So when we are looking at the outcomes of women from spontaneous onset of labor compared to women who induced, and then we're looking at how many women said they had birth trauma, how many women experienced obstetric violence, how many women felt they were mistreated or were coerced, how many women have look at their birth and say, I would do something different. It's all substantially leaning towards women who are induced. So women are more likely to be traumatized. They're more likely to feel they were mistreated. They're more likely to feel that they weren't given all the information, that they were misled, that this was a very simple thing, that people didn't fully prepare them for what happened. And once they're on that path, there's no stopping it. So women will often talk to, in the BEST survey, which is a large study that Hazel Keetle and myself undertook, where we had over 8,800 women respond. We asked women a really, really important question, which turned out to be one of the best questions in the whole survey, which was, would you do anything different if you would have another baby? Perfect question. And we got more than 6,000 comments from women who wanted to do different things after they'd experienced that. And we had a huge number of comments around induction, saying, never again. I will not be convinced to do this again. I will do everything to avoid it. I felt misled, I felt misinformed, and I felt coerced. And I feel like that was the point at which everything went wrong. And so we have to look at induction beyond just the physical implications. We have to look also now at the deep emotional implications and the impact on future births. We're seeing more and more women requesting cesarean next time because they're so traumatized by their first birth. So what induction does in itself is start a ripple of influence and impact that I don't think we've adequately measured in a very short sight. Literally, what is induction about? Induction is about the baby. We have forgotten and thrown the mother out in the process of focusing on the baby. And if you actually look at the outcomes for the baby in terms of babies dying, they're very tiny numbers if women are well and healthy and monitored well. Yet we hang out such giant shrouds around the risk. And women are told unbelievable things like, if you don't have an induction, your baby will die. This is coercion. This is not informed consent. So I think we clearly do induction far too often. We do not give women adequate time to make decisions that are informed with full ramifications. And we have not even begun to scratch the surface on how we're contributing to birth trauma. And of course, in New South Wales, we've had one of the world's first birth trauma inquiries. If you look through those submissions, you constantly pick this issue up. coerced, not informed, pushed into an induction, wished I'd never had it. And I just want to make another point. If you look at one of the best induction of labour guidelines that I've ever read, which is the UK NICE guidelines, NICE, anyone can access them. They're on the internet, the NICE induction of labour guidelines. And if you look at the detail that they require of health providers before an induction is undertaken, such as make sure that the woman understands that this is a medical intervention, it will affect her birth options and her birth experience, that they're going to need to have more pain relief, more vaginal examinations, giving women the time to discuss this with their partner, give them the time to ask questions, make sure women know that they can decline or stop an induction, respecting their decision, providing them with alternatives. I can tell you, it's just not happening. So if you go down the line of any medical intervention, you are supposed to give informed, evidence-based information for a woman to make informed consent. And it is not happening. And I think that this potentially is opening a complete legal nightmare in the future for women who are going to have recourse over the decisions that they made without all the information that they would have liked.
I'm questioning, Hannah, how health professionals are trained and potentially, like from a policy perspective, trained to talk about what induction truly is. And I think you're right. I think a lot of the dead baby card and things get pulled out of nowhere. And in that birth trauma inquiry, one of the recommendations was around, shared decision-making and helping women to truly understand the full repercussions, because induction, like you say, has this incredible flow-on effect. And I'd extend it even further to the parenting. I see new parents, and a big part of my role is helping women to debrief their birth experiences. And 9 times out of 10, the people who come back for a birth debrief have come back as a result of the induction. And then I get to see firsthand the impact that's having on their early life with a new baby, and their body, is having to go through a massive healing process, as well as their mind and their heart is having to integrate what just happened as they go through one of the most intense experiences of welcoming a baby and getting to know their baby. So the ripple effects is very long lasting. When do you think it could be appropriate, and how would people know the difference?
So, interestingly enough, when we look at our data and we look at women who have babies in different models of care, what we find is there's a lot more shared decision making, and a lot more of women feeling they made the decision and feeling happy with that decision when there's a relationship between the care provider and the woman.
Right.
So we know that the optimal way for all women and their partners and their families to engage in this incredible miracle of having a baby is to do that within a relationship-based care model. So if we got that right, when a woman needs an induction, she would feel that she'd been heard, she'd made the decision, she'd been listened to, she'd been able to debrief about it afterwards and have things explained to her so she fully understood what happened. And I think we could have much, much better outcomes for trauma. But also, if you look at models of care where you have, for example, continuity of midwifery care, you see much lower rates of induction occurring in those models of midwifery care. So one of the problems I think we've got is that induction, because it's a medical procedure, is sort of left in the hands of the medical profession, and the medical profession are pretty much always on the side of intervention. They want to get that baby out. They're full of risk and fear. And so when they deliver the information because they want to get the outcome that they're after, which is that this woman agrees to induction, that baby comes out, they can relax, nothing bad happens, they won't get blamed. So there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of disconnection between women and their providers, and it puts midwives in a position of feeling like they're constantly trying to give women the strength and the tools to go into these almost battles with the medical providers to stand up for their rights. But there are really good reasons to be induced. So babies that are really not growing well and their growth has declined and the water around that baby has declined to low levels that are concerning, and that baby is showing that the blood flow and the placenta and things like that are not growing. We know those babies are much more at risk of stillbirth.
Right.
So there are good reasons to monitor and know when to then step in and say, right, let's get this baby out now because it's not growing happily in there. We know women who have very high blood pressure. Again, it's another reason that when you look at it all and you start to see the risk that can come with high blood pressure for the mother and for the baby, which can cause the baby again to become smaller and all those issues. There are good reasons for that. Where I feel there is an awful lot of vagueness is around things like diabetes. So pure diabetes, which is type 1 diabetes, or type 2 diabetes or gestational diabetes, where women are on insulin and good amounts of insulin. Yes, there are risks that those babies can grow really quite big, and there are risks that can come. But the problem is we put everybody under the same umbrella and we capture women who have got gestational diabetes, but is well controlled on diet. We should not be putting them into the same kind of pool as we put women who've got highly unstable blood sugars that are needing to have significant medical monitoring. And then there's probably one of the biggest things that women have told us in the data is the big baby. The big baby is used as the biggest shroud of all. Oh, I don't know, this baby's a little bit on the big side. And, I've heard absolutely disgusting comments to women like, if you really want to have this baby vaginally, get ready for an explosion down there. Like,
oh, good Lord.
Terrifying kind of women who saying, well, who wants an explosion down there? And if you were my wife, and these really emotive comments to persuade women. So the big baby, which often comes out as a very normal size, may I say, because ultrasounds are so inaccurate at the end of pregnancy. The other reasons are the big kind of gray area is the going over your due date. Now, estimated due date is that it's an estimate, and it anywhere from 2 weeks before that estimation of 40 weeks and anywhere to 2 weeks afterwards is considered to be the area where the majority of babies are going to be born. So 98% of babies are going to be born in that 4-week period. But increasingly, for example, I went 42 weeks with all my babies. It was my norm, but back in those days, that was quite acceptable. Now what we've seen is that the 42 weeks has declined to 41 weeks, to 40 plus 10 days, then to 41 weeks. And increasingly, we're seeing the move down and down and down towards 40. Then we're seeing now older women have a higher risk of stillbirth, so let's induce everybody that's over the age of 40 at 39 weeks. And then you start to hear women say, obstetricians say, well, we should also do that at 35 years of age. And then you've got people wanting to constantly move the parameters. So there is no doubt the past 41 weeks, there is an increase that occurs in stillbirth that is faster than the preceding weeks. But also with women who are with a well-moving baby, with a baby with lots of fluid around it, with a placenta that's functioning well, they can wait and be monitored and have that individualized to them. So it should never be a routine. And you should take very differently a woman who is healthy and low risk to a woman who has got blood pressure problems and diabetes. Then they should never be considered in the same kind of grouping. But unfortunately, everyone's so focused on the weeks and the days that they don't look at the individual and have individualized conversations with women.
I think that's a really, really wise piece of advice right there. The evidence around a greater rate of that we often get told as women is only one piece of the puzzle. It's a statistical, evidence based on other women in studies all around the world, not your pregnancy. And having a look at the individual pregnancy and asking the question, what are the signs my baby's not doing so well? And if there are no signs and your baby's moving beautifully and the fluid levels are good and the placenta looks okay, then that is worth challenging the status quo, because I think a lot of decision making, Hannah, just gets made on these policies based on evidence, but without really looking at the individual pregnancy in its entirety. And that doesn't tend to be very wise decision making. So if women were being pressured to induce and they ask the question, are there any other alternatives? What sort of other options could they have in assuming it's a healthy, well pregnancy and there aren't real indicators that baby's not happy? What other options could they go down the path for?
Well, they've obviously got the option to wait. Now, depending where they are, if they're beyond 41 weeks or they want to go beyond 42 weeks, then it's probably quite sensible to say, well, let's do a little bit more frequent monitoring. Yeah. So we might say, well, let's do an ultrasound at 41 weeks and see how much fluid is around that baby, how that baby's growing, where the blood flows to that baby. Maybe, this is where you might say a CTG to have a reassuring trace. But again, CTGs opens a whole nother, conundrum, because they're incredibly unreliable and they might give you a 24-hour window and that's about it. Really the best thing that we've got, and I remember when I trained as a midwife back 34 odd years ago, we used to get women to count the movements. Honestly, when I look back at it and I think these poor women having there to mark down on a chart how many movements they had, we now know that that's absolutely completely useless. That what we should be doing is to get women to know what is normal for them and tell us when they're experiencing something that is not normal for them. So, if a woman's worried, listen to her and investigate it. A woman should be able to be offered different alternatives. For example, do they want to have acupuncture? Do they want to have what we call a cervical sweep, which is where we know after 41 weeks, there's some evidence that will tell us that it is got some benefit in reducing induction, where a midwife or a doctor puts their fingers into a woman's vagina with her consent, obviously, and her fully informed, understanding why you're doing that. Then your fingers go into the cervix and you gently separate the membrane around the baby from the cervix. And what that does is release a flood of prostaglandin, which is part of stimulating the onset of labor. So that may be one way to also get things happening. So what's really important is that women understand, when we talk about risks too, let's be really clear with women when we say your baby might die. Are we talking about one more baby in 1,000 women? One more baby in 1,000 to one woman is unacceptable. And to another woman, it's like, oh my goodness, that's nothing. Of course I'm willing to take that risk. So it's not up to us to make the decision on what is acceptable risk. Our responsibility as health providers to find out what's important to women, to tell them what the evidence says, and to explain it to them in a way that they understand and make their own assessment and decision about that risk. But we don't do that. We don't say to them, well, if you waited another week, your risk of your baby dying is about one more baby in 1,000 compared to a woman who got induced. We don't say that. We don't give women information that they can actually use. We don't then say to her, here's the positives and here's the negatives, and the downsides are this, and this could happen, and you might be more likely to be disappointed with your birth, etc. We don't say any of that. We just say, we have a gap in labour ward today or tomorrow or in 3 days. Let's get this baby out. That's usually the sum amount of the information.
What type of evidence do we have around alternatives to try to bring labour on? What we know that stimulates labour is the pressure of the baby down on the cervix. When a baby's high or a little bit malpositioned, which could prevent them from that woman's body going into labour, what sort of other alternatives could they use to potentially support or promote the onset of spontaneous labour?
Yeah, so when we're talking about evidence, we've got to remember there's many levels. We're talking about high-level evidence, which is the one that makes the greatest impact, which is the randomized control trial. We would have much less evidence when it comes to high-level evidence for some of these interventions. We certainly would have anecdotal evidence and lower-level evidence of potentially some benefit, but importantly, no harm. And I think that's really important. So acupuncture, yes, the evidence is mixed and not super strong, but the problem with acupuncture is that, some trials will use a sham, so they'll use pretend acupuncture needles. Others won't. Everyone uses different techniques. Acupuncture and acupuncturists are so individualized. We're doing a study at the moment. One of my colleagues is an acupuncturist, and we're doing a study looking at her cervical preparation kind of plan, which she does with women to reduce induction of labor. And what she does is incredibly complex, incredibly individualized, and incredibly in tune with that particular woman. But when you do a trial, you say everyone's got to have the same thing. And so you almost defeat the purpose of acupuncture. So, I find it really hard to actually evaluate some of these more what we call complementary therapies. Rebozo is another fantastic way of potentially helping women to adjust their baby's position. And that's where you use the scarf with women who got posterior babies to try and get them in a better position. Hands and knees, but again, the evidence is kind of not very strong on whether or not if you're on your hands and knees for hours on the day, that's going to make a benefit. Probably the worst thing you can do is what we currently do, which is be very sedentary, sitting on chairs.
Yeah.
There is some interesting evidence around the use of the birth ball. I know when I was pregnant with my kids, I just lived my last few weeks on the birth ball. It makes your pelvis come out. It makes you open up your hips. It makes you much more likely to push yourself into a more optimal position. I think it's also important for women to remember that the majority of women and babies are perfectly matched. So genetics is kind. It usually produces a baby that will get its way through a mother's pelvis. Sometimes a little harder than another person, but generally most babies fit. And yet we constantly destabilize that understanding from women and make them doubt their bodies, doubt their capacity, doubt that they're able to have babies, somehow that they're faulty and they're inept. Well, women have never been healthier. Women have never had better diets. They've never been taller. Yes, we are more heavy than we should be, and that is definitely a risk factor in when it comes to childbirth. Yes, we are having babies later, and yes, the older bodies don't quite do it like the younger bodies, but the older people, the older women often parent with a lot more maturity and all of the things and resources that come with being older. So we destabilize women constantly by the discourse that we have around them, rather than reminding them and rebuilding the faith in physiology and their amazing bodies that we really should be.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of benefit to doing body work as well because of our lifestyle factors and the fact that we can be very sedentary. Things like chiropractic and osteopathy in helping to realign the body and make sure the nervous system is functioning optimally. All of those things can help the wonderful communication mechanisms through birth to optimize hormone release and letting go, the body opening, stretching, allowing the baby to come through the pelvis. So there's a lot of benefit, I think, in different types of body work. Is there any evidence around things like osteopathy and chiropractic in this space?
Not high level evidence, no. But there's certainly plenty of women who say they find it very good, very useful. My response to that always is, well, there's also no evidence that I have heard of harm. So if it makes women feel good and it makes them feel that they're taking some kind of control over their health and they want to do it and they have the financial resources to do it, then what is the problem?
Yeah.
We don't have evidence for everything on earth that we embrace and we find pleasure from. things like, for example, when I went overdue with my babies, I had castor oil because my mother drank castor oil. I can't even think about the word now without
We
feeling it.
used to get it when we were in trouble.
Yes, yes, it
It
was an
was used,
old-fashioned.
yeah, a form of punishment. Mm.
Yeah, and all it did is make me have, very loose bowels for a while. And eventually I went into labor after some acupuncture. And who knows, maybe I was ready to go into labor. And the acupuncturist said to me, "Oh my goodness, you're so ready." And I sometimes look back at it and I think it was her words saying to me, "My body's ready," that made my body
Yeah,
go, "Oh, I can do this."
yeah,
So, women need to do, and what works for one woman or what's comforting for one woman's not comforting for another woman.
yeah. And birth readiness is a really interesting topic I often talk to my pregnant women about. I often think, in fact, it was a very wise midwife who told me this years ago, that women often go through catharsis as they get close. Use the word catharsis as they get closer to birth. It's that internal recognition that I'm about to walk into the mystery. I have no idea what's ahead. I can't control this. I've just got to hang on for the ride. There's no getting off the train. I've got to walk through that doorway into parenting. And with that realization, we can feel a bit wobbly, emotional, start to question and doubt ourselves and our ability to get through it. And what often happens in that space is there can be a little bit of a, a release, an emotional release of frustration, tears, anger, because you're about to do something you've never done. And it's on the other side of those tears that the body can just go, "Oh, okay, bring it on. I'm ready for anything." I call it the fuck it moment, because it's that feeling of bring it on. I'm just ready for I'm so over this pregnancy. But sometimes that reckoning, that emotional hanging on of control can just be the mechanism that then enables that mother to be ready for that baby, because it is a mysterious thing. Is it the mother that starts at the process, or the baby, or a combination of both? I think it's a dance between the two.
Definitely a dance between the
Yeah.
two.
And there will be mothers that are not ready to go into labor because of whatever's going on, and there's babies who potentially don't come down enough or stay quite high and don't cause those pressures and those mechanisms to be activated for labour. So it is a mysterious thing. And when it comes to decision making, Hannah, it can be very, very difficult for women. Is there any other piece of advice you'd like to give for women who are feeling that pressure, and in terms of making good decisions and feeling confident in their choices, particularly if they're pushing back against medical advice?
Yeah, so two things. I just want to pick up on what you just said about the word I would use is surrender. And I think that we're not very good at that today in modern society. We're in control of absolutely everything. And, that comes with good things, and that comes with real problems when it comes to parenting. So I always say to the women that I care for that, all of these uncertainties and all of these challenges and all of these learning to deal with doubts and fears are preparing you to be a parent, because that is kind of the rest of your life. And so learning to have that almost spiritual journey through pregnancy and birth that is part of forming you as a person and as a parent and as a producer of the future of the world, I think are profoundly meaningful moments. And I think we live in a microwave society, stick in the microwave, just hit a button for 2 minutes and bang, you've got a full meal. Well, that's great and not so great. And and we can either choose to do microwave pregnancies and births, or we can choose to cook ourselves a 3-course healthy meal that takes a lot of time. And in a society that always leans to the fast, the convenient, the predictable, the planned, it's very hard for humans to stop and reshape and rethink. But pregnancy and birth gives us the most amazing moments of growth.
Yeah.
We learn about ourselves. We learn about our strengths and our vulnerabilities. We deal with a whole lot of baggage we bring to birth from our parents, from our lives, from our the way society makes women feel about their bodies. So it's our moment of triumph, it's our moment of transformation as well. The other thing that I think is really important that women know is that you are the only person in this whole arrangement and this whole scenario that has the power. And women so often say things like, they told me I had to, they made me, I have to. I hate hearing I have to, because you do not have to do anything. First of all, we as midwives and doctors will work for you. Second of all, you are the star of the show. And third of all, you have law on your side, and there's nothing that anyone can do to your body without your permission. And you legally have the full remit to make decisions until that baby comes out and takes its first breath. You are the final judge and arbiter and decision maker in that pregnancy. So I would love to see two things happen with women more. Take the spiritual journey of growth and do the work, because that work will go through the rest of your life as a parent and as a person. Number two, you have the power, and don't ever feel that you can't say no. And you can say no really nicely. So I often say to women, just say, thank you so much for that information, but I'm choosing to decline, or I'd like another option. When it's put so clearly, bottom line is that is the law, and anything done to you that's different to what you say is assault and is illegal. And so if women could find their power and go and do the work and go the journey, and women would stand up and say, thank you very much, but I decline. Wow, we could transform birth overnight.
And isn't that a key lesson in parenting? Because once you assume that role of advocate for your unborn baby, the job gets even bigger once they land, because that's going to be a life sentence, that one. Or at least until they're 18 enough.
Or even beyond. I've got a 19-year-old and 26-year-old, and I sometimes think parenting even gets more complicated as life. So,
it is.
At some point we don't get out of doing the work, so why not start it now?
Exactly. You are so singing my song. I really see so clearly when you watch women make these transformations and transitions, whatever you forego in the pregnancy, if you hand your power over at any time, which is okay, it's not the end of the world. But there's going to come a point in your parenting journey that what you missed out there, you'll have to make up for further down the track, because it is unavoidable that you grow and that you transform into the mother. When you go from the woman to the mother, that is a bigger version of the woman. And so much of the journey of pregnancy and birth is setting you up for that next phase. So what I encourage women to do is to walk your path, not somebody else's path. Don't let other people's stories influence you, but to walk your path and make the next most obvious decision along the way when, whatever you're facing. And it can be very easy to listen to the advice that you're getting from your caregivers, but also check in on what feels good for you. We're often looking outside of ourselves for answers through Google and other people and their opinions, and all of that information can be helpful, but you need to pass it through your own radar system of what feels right for you, and checking in on your baby. Is it appropriate to bring the baby forth now or not? Hannah, I had a woman who had a very difficult first birth through induction, and she was cooking her second baby, and she was very clear she wanted to avoid one second time round, but of course her babies seemed to take quite a while to cook. The pressure was on. She rang me in a bit of a flurry about, I don't know what to do, there's so much pressure, and I just got her to stop, to take 3 very slow, gentle breaths, to close her eyes, to see the 2 paths before her, to imagine herself walking on one path, and how does your body feel? How does your baby feel? Is your body contracting, or does it feel open and ready? And then to hop off that path and imagine herself on that second path. And she got a very, very clear message just through checking in on herself that her baby was fine. There was no hurry. She could leave it another few days. And in the end, she went into spontaneous labour. So we do know, we don't always know that we know, but when we check in on ourselves, we can find what's true for us beyond the evidence, beyond other people's opinions, but what can feel good for us in that space. Hannah, this discussion has been so rich and so potent in helping people to understand that there are alternatives, that it isn't just a path that you walk down without appreciating the full repercussions of those decisions. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think whatever your decision is, whether it's fully embracing of wanting an induction or fully embracing of wanting a cesarean or not, the judgment shouldn't be about what a woman wants. The judgment should be on us as the healthcare providers to make sure that we've provided all the information and we've provided the space and we've provided the opportunity for women to make those really informed decisions. Because at the end of the day, she is the one that lives with the ramifications, not us. We walk away, we never see her again, but she will live with that every single day, whether it's emotionally and psychologically or physically. And so it's women who must decide, and we who must give them that information and give them the space to decide.
Beautiful. Well, thank you everybody for listening today. It's been an incredible conversation and a topic I've been wanting to do for a very long time. So I want to thank you so much, Hannah, for giving up your time to speak to everyone today. And we'll see you again next week with more goodness coming your way. Thanks for listening. This episode contains important information when making decisions around induction and understanding the full ramifications of those decisions. In the next episode of the Transform Your Birth podcast, I will share with you the coaching I give all my birthing women who are choosing to induce. I'll be talking about birth readiness and how to prepare emotionally and mentally leading up to the induction, as well as what to negotiate on the day, and explore the role of partners more deeply so they know what to look out for and how to support you in these circumstances. Little things can make a big difference. And so please take the time to listen and take notes so you can communicate to your carers how you are approaching the induction and what they can do to support you. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au? Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.